Okay, all right, so welcome everyone. My name is Darko, and I'm here with Diana Rodgers. And Diana Rodgers is an amazing person. Let me tell you about Diana real quick. So Diana's a real food licensed registered dietitian and nutritionist who spent the last 18 years living on a working organic farm in New England that grows vegetables and raises pasture-based meat. And she's the author of 2 best-selling cookbooks and runs a clinical nutrition practice. Her latest book's called Sacred Cow, which I've read before this interview, and it's amazing, by the way, and it's coming out soon. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon. And she's also working on a documentary called Sacred Cow, which I've seen the trailer for this, and it's absolutely amazing. And it's going to be out this fall or before this fall. And it's exploring the important role of animals in our food system, okay? And Diana is also the producer of the host and producer of the Sustainable Dish podcast and mum of 2 active teenagers, right?
That's right. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and you also speak at universities and conferences internationally about nutrition and sustainability, social justice, animal welfare, and food policy issues. So this is going to be a really cool discussion because right now meat is being basically pinned up as a scapegoat, right? Like everything's being pushed and blamed on meat. Societies are trying to rid meat from schools even, eat less meat. That's the whole narrative right now. So I just wanted to ask you some questions as the expert on this topic about the nutrition, the ethics, and the environment, the 3 different arguments around meat. So first off, Diana, first of all, welcome.
Thank you so much. And hope we can, the answers are sometimes very complex and long. So I'll try to be as succinct as possible, but saying meat is bad, meat's going to kill you, it's bad for the planet, and it's wrong to eat animals. Those are very easy things to say. They're very convincing. They make great sound bites. And to properly break that down, you need a book and a film and many, many hours of an interview. So
absolutely. Yeah. So exactly. So for people that want to go deeper, they definitely need to read your book and definitely need to watch your documentary. But it's funny because what we're going to cover in this interview is everything that's in your documentary and your book. Yep. But it's good because some people learn differently. Some people just want the sound bites. They just want to know that it's safe. So first of all, let's start with why do you believe that meat has become the scapegoat?
Yeah, and that's to me the most important chapter of the book, and we're actually offering that for free to folks who pre-order it so they can dig in right away and read that. So we're sending that directly to people who send us their receipt for pre-ordering the book. Throughout all of human culture, we've often literally posted our negative emotions and fears on a scapegoat, on an animal, on a sacrificial animal, instead of just dealing with them directly. We're seeing a massive decline in health. We're seeing the planet become more and more ruined, and we're also very conflicted about our role in nature and what death means. And we're very scared of death. We don't deal with death on a regular basis anymore. We don't see animals die for our food. Less than 2% of Americans actually are involved in food production at this point. But it used to be everyone had to, cut the head off a chicken and pluck it or something like that. We also are, you in the health space know that, everyone's very obsessed these days with longevity. Don't die at any cost, and instead, it seems that cattle, red meat is seen as the most bloody, the most powerful food in our culture. It's also, a lot of people think it's bad to eat animals and it's bad for the planet. And so let's just, instead of dealing with fossil fuel industry and the industrial agriculture system, which are very complex, in our sort of fear of death and disconnection from nature, let's just say cows are bad. I did a lot of reading, especially from this one expert, Frederic Leroy, who is a professor in Brussels. And he does a lot of writing. It's really interesting stuff about the role meat has always had in our society, and how conflicted we are today, where it's at the same time a health food and a poison. And because it's so powerful and represents wealth and masculinity and blood and death, it's able to absorb all of our fears about health and the environment and ethics.
Right. So I guess the next question for you is, are humans omnivores? Are we supposed to be eating meat? Because all the questions that I have are based on the vegan argument, because the vegans are very set in their ways, right? They believe that we shouldn't eat meat. We don't need to eat meat. So are humans omnivores?
Yeah. So as you mentioned right before we got on the podcast, the book is actually constructed in a way to answer all of these questions. And I go kind of question by question just through the book. And one of the very first questions I answer is, are humans omnivores? Yes, we are biologically omnivores. Do some people seem to do okay on a vegan diet? Yes, I'm going to admit that. Totally, it seems to be possible. But for most people, it seems to be just only a matter of time before their health declines. There are nutrients in meat that we can't get from plants, or are very difficult for our bodies to absorb from plants. We can't get B12 from plants. You can get some from things like algae, but most people I know don't eat a lot of algae on a regular basis. The supplements for B12 that are plant-based are not really very good for you, and actually increase your body's requirement for B12. And then things like iron are, technically they are in spinach, but it's very difficult to absorb them. It's not as bioavailable as heme iron, which is what you find in red meat. And so, what we see in typical vegans and vegetarians are low protein status and either deficiencies or insufficiencies of many of the key nutrients, like vitamin A, iron, and B12. And so there are genetic reasons for that. Some people can't make the conversion, for example, from beta carotene, which is the orange color in sweet potatoes and carrots, into the active form of retinol, which is what we need, the form of vitamin A that our bodies utilize. About 45% of all humans just can't make that conversion easily. Some people can't convert ALA into the essential fatty acids that we actually need, EPA. People whose historic culture grew up in coastal areas where they ate a lot of fish, those people tend to have genes that are turned off to be able to make the conversion from plant-based fatty acids into the EPA that we need. So there's a lot of reasons why the vegan diet doesn't work for people. And what we see is about 85% of vegans and vegetarians actually go back to eating meat within a year.
And I can attest to that, because I have some clients who are ex-vegans, and they texted me saying, "Oh, I can't wait to eat my steak."
Yes, I find that most of my male clients, as a clinical dietitian, you tell them to eat meat and they just run out the door. Like I can't even finish the sentence and they're going to buy a steak. But a lot of women feel that way too. Although I think a lot of women are more cautious when it comes to reintroducing red meat. They might be more likely to pull in some fish or chicken. And this is just a cultural thing that we have to break down. I think women need to sort of reclaim steak.
Yeah, because for a woman eating a steak, it's not really,
very feminine, right? It's bloody. It's on a bone. It's, a boneless, skinless chicken breast is almost like a tofu version of meat, right? You can almost just not even touch it or think about an animal when you eat something like that, or some white meat. But red meat, you kind of can't avoid the fact that it's actually meat.
Yeah. So I guess the big elephant in the room, because when I was buying my bone broth in the UK at my butcher's, he was like, "What's your diet like?" Because he started to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And then I told him that I eat mostly what I buy from him, the red meat and the bone broth and stuff like that. And he said, "Oh, but red meat gives you cancer." I said, oh. And anytime I get that reply, I'm just like, oh, God. Because I've answered that question so many times, but how do
Right.
you answer?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, right, that a butcher said that to you. I've also I speak a lot at agriculture conferences talking to ranchers who don't eat their own meat. I was at the International Bison Conference, and these bison ranchers weren't eating bison, which is such a
Wow.
shame. But they've heard that it's going to kill you. And meanwhile, they're all overweight because they eat so much processed foods. So the studies that vilify meat for health reasons are largely based on population studies. So they look at a typical Western diet, right? And meat is generally part of that. So they'll look at a typical omnivore versus a typical vegetarian. But there are many lifestyle factors at play here that often aren't taken into account. So a typical vegetarian compared to a typical omnivore, the vegetarian is much less likely to smoke and drink heavily. They're much more likely to do yoga, to work out regularly, to just keep a generally healthier lifestyle. But the studies that have actually taken those things into account, so they're called confounding factors in a scientific study. When you remove those confounding factors and actually look at people, who have a very similar lifestyle. So for example, there was a study that looked at people who shop at health food stores. So those people are, generally the type of people who, would work out more regularly. Maybe they take some supplements. They're really on top of their health. It's a priority to them. They found absolutely no difference at all in longevity between omnivores and vegetarians. So we have to be very critical of these studies and understand that just because one thing is associated with something else, it doesn't mean that the meat is what caused the heart disease or diabetes or cancer. So that's, similar logic I could apply to shark attacks, right? Warm weather, shark attacks happen more often in warm weather. And, but that doesn't mean that shark attacks cause the warm weather or that warm weather caused the shark attacks. You cut out on me for a second. Are you still there? You still there?
Oh, yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
You
can you hear
froze
me?
up on me just for a second.
Oh, so yeah, okay, so we covered that. So red meat doesn't cause cancer. Red meat doesn't increase chronic disease risk. Those are all myths based on the epidemiology studies, right?
Exactly.
So and I spoke about epidemiology before, but we can get into more different questions now. So we covered that. Red meat doesn't give you cancer, right? And if that was the case, then lots of people would be dying of that.
Exactly.
But it's not happening. So meat is healthy, right? And
yes, meat is healthy. It's an important food for humans. We evolved because we ate meat. Not to eat meat, but because we ate meat. Our brains are largely made of cholesterol. We actually need animal fats and animal protein in order to thrive. So there's a big difference between just kind of getting by, like you can get by on beans and rice and corn, or thriving. And thriving is a whole nother level of health. And I believe that in order to really thrive, to optimize your diet, you need some animal products in there. And it doesn't have to be red meat. It can be fish and shellfish. It can be lots of other, it doesn't have to be beef necessarily, but animal products are critical. And the reason why I'm tackling beef in the book is because it's the most vilified of all the animal products.
yeah, and we're going to get into the ethics and the environment stuff in a sec. But so the argument is, so when I tried veganism for a month, like full on every day, and the reason when I did that, I felt like I was a superior human being to everyone else. I literally felt like that way, and I was like, yeah, you eat meat, you're a bad person. And I started looking at the bodybuilders, the vegan bodybuilders, and I started to form my belief around that. Like, oh yeah, they're eating lots of kale and lots of tofu, so I should do it too, But so the question is, can I get all my nutrients from plants? Like, because you did touch on the fact that there's some people who are, you know, they seem to be doing okay after a few years on a vegan diet.
Yeah. So, you know, those films like Game Changers that, you know, highlight athletes and bodybuilders that are on vegan diets, those people didn't grow up vegan. They weren't vegan from birth. They weren't born to vegan mothers. We've never had a culture of pure vegans. There's never been a vegan, you know, not hunter, but just gatherer society. And there's a reason for that. People, you know, the level of privilege that we have to be able to push away a nutrient dense food and be able to even discuss this is pretty intense. And there's a lot of people that just don't have access to healthy foods in general. And animal products might be the only thing that thrives in their area, or, you know, for a lot of little kids, it's really hard to get them to eat enough spinach to really get the iron in them that they need in order to grow and thrive. But a small piece of meat can do that. And so for any of your listeners that are parents, they know kids are squirmy. They don't have a lot of attention. You're just trying to get some food into them. And most kids absolutely will devour meat and not really touch the spinach. So, you know, I do think that there do seem to be people that are getting away for some number of years on a vegan diet and appear to be healthy. I think it takes a lot of education and planning and supplementation and protein powders and commitment in order to make it work. And I think for the general person, it's just not realistic.
Yeah. And you touched on the parenting aspect, which is interesting to me because when I was back in England a couple months ago, my baby brother, he's 5 years old, and he was just following what I was doing. So I was eating meat, I was eating like eggs, and I wasn't really eating the vegetables. And he was just copying what I was doing. He's like, I want to be big and strong like Aaron. And so he was just eating what I was eating, which is cool. But most households, the parents are taught that, I was taught this too growing up, that vegetables is the main thing and you want to have a tiny bit of meat, but you want to eat your vegetables. You're 5 a day. You have to eat your vegetables. Your fruit and vegetables are so important.
Right.
So,
yeah.
what would
You want me to touch on that real quick? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying don't eat vegetables. That, you know, I'm not advocating for a carnivore only diet, although there do seem to be people that are thriving that way too. I think if you have access to meat and to vegetables, that should be the bulk of your diet. I think the big problem with our health today is ultra processed foods that stimulate us to overeat and that are nutrient poor foods, high in calories, but low in nutrition. Pretty much everything in the middle of the grocery store that's shelf stable are generally things you need to stay away from. And shopping in produce section, shopping in the meat and seafood section, those are going to be the most nutrient dense foods and, you know, best absorbed by your body and optimize, you know, if you truly want to optimize your diet, those are the things to stick to.
Nice. Yeah. And what about grass-fed or grain-fed? What's the difference and what do you prefer? What do you recommend?
Right. That's a very complex question. I looked at all the literature and I'm sure you read in the book. As far as nutrition goes, there's not a massive significant difference between grain-fed, grain-finished and grass-finished beef. And we should note that all beef starts out on grass. The cattle that end up on a feedlot aren't born on a feedlot. They all start on ranches. But the ones that end up on a feedlot for the last about 3 or 4 months of their life, it's not like the meat is poison and, you know, pumped with, you know, tons of antibiotics that are then going to get into your system or other toxins and things like that. I did look at all the literature I could find on this. And the good thing about that means buy the best meat you can afford to buy. And if you don't have access to grass-fed regenerative meat from, you know, the most perfect ranch from your farmer up the street, that's okay. I still think from you know, as a dietitian, that people should be eating red meat, and beef is way more nutrient dense than chicken or pork, and which are, you know, sort of the three main meats that you would find in a grocery store. So if that's your only choice, you have limited means, maybe you don't have access to a farmer that has grass-fed beef, you want to give your kids a leg up in life, definitely just go for the beef. But as we'll get to in the environmental and ethics section, grass-fed beef is better on both of those levels. So environmentally, we want to stick with grass-fed beef, and from an ethics perspective, also grass-fed beef is preferable to grain-finished beef. But again, nutritionally, not a massive difference there.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about that. So, because most people, they think that the grain fed is just terrible because they're fed so many antibiotics. Like, I have people that tell me, oh yeah, I don't want to eat, you know, food, that meat that's not grass fed, because they get pumped with so many antibiotics. I've seen all the videos, you know, and you know, there's lots of studies that show that in a cut of meat, you're not actually getting those antibiotics into your body. Right?
No,
Like
you know, in developed countries, this is highly regulated, and those, you know, anything that doesn't pass inspection does not make it into the food system. So there's really no worry at all. You know, antibiotic use is an issue in the environment, because what ends up happening is these animals are taking them in and then excreting them in their manure, and then that causes some issues like antibiotic resistance. And so it's not like I'm pro antibiotic, but as far as a steak that you would get at a typical grocery store, or a burger that you might get, like even at a McDonald's, the ingredients in a McDonald's burger are beef. That's it. You're not going to worry about glyphosate or antibiotic residue or any weird hormones or anything like that. And so those, you know, I still think that people should just, you know, do the best they can with their diet. It's like if a doctor were to tell you only eat organic vegetables or don't eat vegetables, they would never say that, right? That's unethical for a doctor to say to a client. They might say, if you have access to organic, that's even better. As a dietitian, that's my position. I think that meat is important. If you have access to grass-fed beef, here's all the other reasons why I think it's a great choice and a better choice. But I still think that, you know, for folks who can't afford it or don't have access to it, they should still be eating some animal source protein, especially when we're looking at a population in America that is 70% of us are overweight or obese. I don't know what the stats are in England, but I'm sure it's pretty similar. And so to tell folks that, you know, we need to be eating less meat is very problematic, because protein is the most satiating macronutrient. It fills you up. To get the same amount of protein you could get in a 4-ounce piece of steak, which is about 200 calories, you would need to eat over 700 calories worth of beans and rice and all those carbs that come along with it. And so I just don't know how ethical it is, you know, to a population that's diabetic, pre-diabetic, obese, to be telling them to cut down on the most nutrient dense best form of satiating food, meat, and going plant-based instead.
yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. So real quick, what's your take on the factory farming side of the meat industry?
So I'm definitely not pro factory farm, but I think it's a complex topic. I think that the chicken and pork industry are way worse than the cattle industry. So the chicken and pork are 100% grain fed their entire lives, indoors their entire lives, and in cramped conditions their entire lives. And it's less nutritious than beef. So for those reasons, you know, I tend not to eat chicken or pork from grocery stores at all, ever. When it comes to beef, cattle are either finished on a feedlot here in the US or they're finished on grass. So for the majority of their life, they're actually grazing on land that we can't crop anyway, because most agricultural land is best suited towards pasture, not for cropping. I was actually in England last summer and spent some time in Northern England and Scotland, and there's not a whole lot of vegetable production going on there. It's cold, it's dark, but what is great is that it's a great place to grow grass. And what animals thrive on grass? Grazing animals. So if you think of most of the world and all the places where it's either too hilly, too rocky, the soil is too dry. There's so many reasons why you wouldn't be able to just monocrop all those areas with just corn or soy. You can graze them with livestock. So then, the ones that end up on a feedlot, much of their diet is actually eating corn husks from the ethanol industry, other food, fibrous food scraps that other animals can't eat because they're ruminants. They need fibrous foods as opposed to chickens and pigs, which they're more like us. They're monogastrics and they're omnivores. And so even a cow that's finished on a feedlot, about 13% of their diet is grain. The rest is inedible food by humans. And so they're actually a net upcycler of food and of protein, and right. Pretty miraculous. And then when we get into the environmental argument, when they're managed well, they can actually improve biodiversity, ecosystem function, water holding capacity of the land. So there's so many benefits that grazing animals can have if they're managed well.
Right. So let's talk about that. So the animals, the grazing animals, the ruminants we're talking about, because one of my friends, he's opened a vegan burger restaurant in America, and he believes that ruminants are actually at fault for increasing greenhouse gases, and they're giving off too much methane. So can you talk about that real quick, like the cattle emitting too much methane?
Yes. So first of all, in the US, the cattle only emit 2% of all greenhouse gases. Transportation and energy and industry are by far the largest emitters of greenhouse gases. But secondly, when we do talk about the methane from ruminant animals, that's part of a biological cycle. So they're breathing out methane, and this is if they didn't eat the grasses and the corn stalks and the other things that these cattle are converting into protein, these things would just break down and emit greenhouse gases anyway. So it's not like if we got rid of the cattle that we'd get rid of any sort of biological methane in our environment. The methane goes, they belch it out. They don't fart it out. They actually belch it out. And so it comes out of their mouth and it goes up into the atmosphere. And after 10 years, it breaks up into water vapor and carbon dioxide. The water vapor is part of the water cycle, rain, that we need. And the carbon dioxide is actually taken up by grasses. The O2, the oxygen, is emitted, and that's what we breathe. And then the carbon is actually taken into the grass, put down through the roots. And there's kind of this magic that happens underground where the roots are leaking out carbon, which is little sugars. Carbon is sugar. It's leaking out these little sugars to all the microbes in the soil and the fungi, the fungi are going down and they're mining rocks and other minerals that they can find and feeding it back to the roots of the grass in this sort of symbiotic relationship. And during that process, some of the carbon actually gets sequestered in the soil. This all happens when cattle are moved properly, when they're not overgrazing or undergrazing. And I actually have this poster right behind me, so I don't know if your viewers are going to be able to see it. But on sacredcow.info, we actually sell these, and I also just have the graphic that folks can check out. So this is all, again, it's part of a cycle. The cattle are then eating the grass again. They're taking in that carbon. The carbon is then part of the meat. Their manure is carbon that then gets, put back into the soil. So again, this is a biological process, and which is very different from fossil fuels, which are extracting ancient locked carbon in deep in the ground and emitting it straight into the atmosphere as a one-way street. So not a cycle.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that explanation. And also the another question, another issue that people have is with cattle is like they take up too much water. Like it takes so much water to produce beef.
I know. And it's as if they're like these blimps that just keep sucking it up, and then it just vaporizes or something and goes into nowhere, right? So cattle, when they're on grass, they're also urinating. So the water is actually being cycled back into the grass. They're spreading the moisture around. So they're drinking it in one area, then they're walking up the hill and urinating there, and, taking a poop there. So it's all helping the soil actually retain moisture. And when we have healthy grasslands with deep roots, which is only possible when you have ruminant action there. If we remove all the ruminants, then the grasses just die. They co-evolved with the ruminants. And so when we have healthy grasses with ruminants on them, with healthy root systems, those roots help store water better. And the more carbon in the soil, the more water molecules are going to be in the soil. And so when you're monocropping, when you're just planting corn or soy, there's a lot of extra space. There's a lot of tilling and a lot of extra space there where there's exposed dirt. When there's a rain event, the rain just washes that dirt away. It washes right into our rivers, clouding them up, taking the pesticides with them and poisoning our fish and the animals that eat the fish, like bear and all the other animals that rely on that river for life. But when we have a healthy, well-managed ecosystem that has cattle and healthy roots, that water goes straight down and it actually stays there.
Right. So if everyone decided to eat meat, would there be enough supply?
So I did the calculations for the United States. I didn't do it for everywhere because I just don't have the raw data for every location. And in the United States, we do have enough land to be able to grass finish all the beef cattle we have currently. So right now, the beef cattle that we have, 85% of them are currently grazing on land we can't crop. So it's not like all these cows are just sitting in feedlots forever and ever. Some of them are finished on feedlots, but the majority of them right now are just out grazing. And if we weren't to finish them on feedlots and just keep them on grass, there's a lot of underutilized pasture. There's a lot of unutilized pasture. And also this management technique that I keep talking about, where they're moved frequently with electric fencing instead of just scattered around when they're managed properly. Which folks will get a better understanding of when they watch the film, because I actually have some animations that show this. And also on sacredcow.info, we have some graphics that show the difference between continuous grazing and well-managed grazing. We have more than enough land to finish all of our beef cattle. And I think that the solutions need to be regionally appropriate. So in some areas that might mean camel or goats. Goats do really well where there's less grass and it's more kind of scrubby. We raise goats here on the farm, and they don't eat as much grass as they do eat like the little bushes and all that kind of the brambles and things like that. The sheep are more interested in grass. So it really depends on the region, what's culturally appropriate in the region. Are folks going to eat beef? I don't want to push my ideals of a diet on other people. I just want to allow people to understand that if they choose to eat meat, it can be done in a better way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. We're not trying to push meat on people. We're just saying basically what the facts of eating meat are, So the biggest question I have for you is, why eat animals if we can survive on plants? Mm-hmm. We didn't say thrive. We said survive. So why survive. Eat animals? Why
if you can get by on plants, why eat animals? If you don't have to have death, why have it, right?
Right.
And the reality is death is going to happen whether you like it or not. And so, do you want to optimize your health or not? So, as I mentioned, I live on an organic vegetable farm primarily. We do raise animals, but in the fields, we absolutely have to have animal inputs in order to have healthy vegetables. So there is no such thing as a deathless food system. Lots of things die in order for plants to live. Soil is decomposition. That's what it is. It's dead stuff. It's not just dirt. And so, there's a lot of things that need to die in order for our food to happen. It's just whether or not you want to admit that. So, for example, in grain production, there's, the tractors are chopping up little chipmunks and squirrels and bunnies and snakes. The chemicals are annihilating all of our pollinators, and the repercussions of that are, declining bird populations. In order to clear a field, in order to grow a massive crop of vegetables or grains, you have to eliminate the habitat that was there before, because vegetable fields are not a natural occurring thing. We have to make them. And so what are you going to do with all the deer that once lived there? If they can't eat your lettuce, well, you have to do something with those deer. And so most farmers that I know have to keep the deer out, and that limits their habitat. And so we have to understand that death is an essential part of life. It's not the end of a line. It's just a piece in the circle of life. And, we can either take responsibility for that death and make sure that the animal was raised well and, had as low stress of death as possible, or we can pretend it doesn't exist and pretend that we're, superior to everybody else by, having no death for our lives to happen, but that's actually a lie.
Yeah. And so is eating animals like immoral?
So I don't think so, because, if we need grazing animals in order to have much of our agricultural land thrive, and humans are omnivores, then I don't think we need to apologize for eating animals. I think we just need to do it in the most responsible way possible. And so there are better ways and worse ways to do everything. And so, I kind of break down all the different moral arguments in the book. I go through sentience, I go through least harm. And at the end of the day, what I come to is that a food system without animals is actually doing more harm than good.
Right. And so my last question is, there's a lot of talk right now about lab grown meat. Mm-hmm. They want to grow meat and have it be the same texture as meat from the actual animal. And they're talking about that being more sustainable. What's your thoughts about that?
So what these companies are not really telling you is everything that goes into that lab to make that meat, and all the energy it requires, all the monocrops it requires, all that, whether it's from pea protein or soy or, wheat or corn. It takes massive amounts of crops that are not grown organically, that are destroying our topsoil and killing our biodiversity, all the birds and the insects, in order to form this fake meat products that's inferior to real meat. And it's not doing anything to actually improve the environment, where if we just manage the animals properly and do regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, we can actually improve land and improve the water holding capacity, all these great ecological benefits that I mentioned, and have a nutrient dense food. So, it's a direct line from the sun. All energy is from the sun. And the cattle are just turning solar energy basically into protein by eating grass. All of the energy required to produce lab meat or as fake burgers, that's a very expensive process for an inferior food. And so I just highly encourage people to really look at all of the inputs and what gets extracted out, how much profit these companies are making. Beyond Burger is twice as expensive as organic grass-fed beef here in the US per pound. And so, we have to look at the patents.
Wow.
Impossible Burger owns so many patents. If they were really trying to make the world a better place, they wouldn't own all of the patents on their supply chain. So we just have to be very careful and critical of, who's making the money here, what are their interests, and it is ultimate, optimal human health and environmental sustainability really at the heart of what it's all about.
Absolutely. And so final closing comment.
Mm-hmm.
What would you advise people to do? Let's say someone's on the fence. They've been pummeled with all of this propaganda from, What the Health, Cowspiracy, all these documentaries. The media is telling them to eat less meat. The schools are even, cutting back on their meat supply. The kids are saying, the kids are being told to, eat more vegetables. And what would you tell people who are on the fence, who don't know what to do, what to eat? Because we're the only species who doesn't know what to eat, right?
We're the only species that has the luxury to sit around and ponder what we should eat, I think eating more vegetables in general is a good thing. I'm not saying don't eat more vegetables. Calorically, vegetables tend to only make up about 2 to 3% though of our diet. The big villain here is not meat. The big villain is the ultra processed food industry and big agriculture that is, again, destroying our soil health, that is destroying biodiversity. And that should really be the main scapegoat here and not meat. Meat is a natural, nutrient-dense food that can be managed, raised in a way that actually improves the environment. And so I encourage folks to, take a look at the film I made, Sacred Cow, because I actually take people to many different meat producers and butchers, and they can hear stories from people who, had gone meat free and what it did to them. I also have a course called Meat Curious, which is for people who are concerned about eating meat, maybe on the fence, maybe they're an ex-vegetarian or vegan, or maybe they've just cut down a lot on meat. And Rob Wolf, my co-author, and I actually walk you through all of the arguments and why eat plants, why eat meat, what is it that's really causing our main health issues, and then how to ethically source better meat if that's what you choose to do.
Awesome. So people can get that at sustainabledish.com and sacredcow.info.
That's correct. Yeah. All the meat related stuff is at sacredcow.info. When folks pre-order for my book, we have a ton of really awesome thank yous, over $200 worth of thank yous, interviews from the film, and so many more things. So they can get a chapter of the book. So that's sacredcow.info/book. And stay tuned for my film, which you can sign up for. And I'm on Instagram at Sustainable Dish.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to the film. I can't wait to watch it because it's so cool to see that you're actually campaigning for this, because it's quite a scary thing to go up against, right? Like to go up against this narrative of, everyone should eat less meat, and you're coming in with the opposite argument. It's really good. Yeah,
we'll see how it goes.
Well, I'm going to spread the word as much as I can. So thank you very much, Diana, for coming on. And I hope you guys enjoyed. And Diana, thanks again. And I will talk to you soon.
Okay. Have a great day.
All right.